Mac, WN the requiem for a 2018 Ravens season that was pretty interesting, pretty good by anyone who would write about such things. This guy writes books, and I went and dug out my copy of The League, How Five Rivals Created the NFL, Launched a Sports Empire. And, John Eisenberg, I think the best part of the offseason is people like me get a chance to read things like this that you spend your off seasons doing when you're not writing at BaltimoreRavens.com and tweeting at @BMoreEisenberg. So Happy New Year to you, and I know it certainly was short work for the Chargers this week. Guys like you and I had plans for Foxborough and plans for whatever comes from the story. It was a pretty good story, but it came to a pretty abrupt ending, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. An unfortunate ending. I've got a column on Ravens.com saying I thought this was really a good season, one of the best seasons the Ravens have had. I mean, it doesn't. They've won 2 Super Bowls. They've been to 4 AFC Championship games. This is, I believe, their 5th division title. Losing in the first round, not a lot of January glory, but this was the season this franchise needed, in my opinion. A lot of really good things happened. Certainly re-energized the fans. Sort of found an identity on offense, which has been lacking for a long time. Found a new quarterback. Bad ending on Sunday, but found a new quarterback, and so and won a division title, which is not to be underestimated. Again, unfortunate how it ended, but certainly if you fly up to 35,000 feet and take account of the big picture, there's no doubt that the pros outweigh the cons in this season. The Ravens really needed this, and a lot of good things happened.
At 4-5, and where Harbaugh stood, and where Flacco stood, and where the organization was, the last 8 weeks have changed a lot of things, including getting Purple Flamingos back out, right, and having different fans show up. I mean, the people that were in the stands the last 2 weeks are different human beings than were there for the last ride of Ray and that were there when Peyton Manning came in and beat us in a field goal game, right, and certainly different than where we were with Denver the week that John Stedman died. We're going back 18 years now through these eras of playoffs and Dilfers and McNairs and Flaccos and championships and Billings and Harbaughs. This thing's about to turn from the fan base, turn on the brand, and Ozzie being gone. I mean, we're seeing something very transitional happen, and we're also seeing Bisciotti and Harbaugh saying whether they're going to be married, again, and go into sort of a third term together here.
Yeah, and we'll see where that goes. My expectation is that they will come to some agreement. They put out a statement a couple of weeks ago, and it all comes down to whether or not they can reach an agreement. I think the chances are pretty good. I think there's a good friendship there, a good relationship. I think there is a desire to get something done. I mean, maybe John Harbaugh could go somewhere else. They might pay him more money somewhere. I have no idea about this. Let me be the first one to say that.
Well, I think you know John, and I know John. You know Steve, and I think it would be very hard to gauge this, John, and I've had intelligent conversations with a lot of people this week. I mean, Coach Billick was on, and you're seeing what Andy Reid's doing in a second place, and you're seeing that Sean Payton decided to stick around, right? And so I think it's different strokes for different folks, and Harbaugh's clearly a guy that would be very hireable anywhere, and there'd be a lot, Miami would fly the plane in and send draft picks and all that. And I don't know if it gets to that point or not, but this is the point where you decide as a 50-something-year-old man, as you and I'm now in my 50s, right? You make that decision as to what you're going to do with the rest of your life. And if John wants to go off the sunshine in a second situation, Bill Parcells did this every 4 years, right? I mean, Belichick's on his second turn. Now, most people don't think about it like that, but it is. If John wants a second turn, this is a chance to go do that. And I think it will be very meaningful if they decide to stay together.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think he comes back in 2019 without some sort of longer-term deal. I think that's where this is headed. He's got some leverage here. He's got people that are interested. He's coming off a good season. And, he could just coach it out in 2019, become a free agent, and go wherever he wants. So, he could do that. Decide not to do anything. Be like Joe Flacco, bet on himself, in 2012. I don't think it's going to come to that. As I said, I think I think he's probably read. My observation is that he could go have a second act somewhere. I think he would just assume have a continuous first act here. It seems like you can get into a lot of bad situations. Yeah, go ahead, go to Miami, see how that works out. Here, he knows who the owner is. He's in good company in lockstep, really, with the front office. And he's got a new quarterback. There's a lot of positives, and I would be surprised if it turned into something other than him coming back with an extension.
John Eisenberg and I taking a deep dive on all things purple in the aftermath of the 2018 season. As we turn the page, I said to Luke earlier, I'm like, DeCosta's been on the job 2 days. Come on, Eric, do something. That's where we are with this. But this has been a long time coming, and this notion that Ozzy's still going to have an office and what different decisions DeCosta would have made in the past or will make in the future. This is a new canvas, I think, and it may have some older parts. And the decisions begin right away with, all right, Flacco's going to get dealt. What are you going to get for him after you figure out Harbaugh? Then there's, what are we going to do with C.J. Mosley? What's going to become of Suggs and Weddle and Yonda at this point? Where are they? Boy, there's a lot of heart-to-hearts that are going to happen here. A lot of tough talks, maybe in certain cases. I don't know what leaning for any of these men, and I don't think any of us know that. And I think it's the same thing with Harbaugh and Bisciotti, that this is the time for pondering, right? Like for all of these human beings. And I don't think there's any crystal ball for any of this, because I think a lot of these things could go in other directions based on family, money, the future. But this is a decision time for all of these human beings. And there are a lot more moving parts than there usually are in this franchise.
More, I guess it's more. Yeah, I mean, what it is important parts. It's big names. Joe Flacco, Terrell Suggs, two of the 5 biggest names in the history of this franchise. So, yeah, those are big moving parts. And Eric taking over, that's a big moving part. I don't think you're going to see a wild swing in terms of changes in methodology with Eric taking over. He's groomed in the Ozzy school, and he's going to be his own man. He's going to make his own decisions. My expectation is that Ozzy will steer clear. Let Eric make the choice. I mean, they've made this move. It's his ship now. So if I'm Eric and I'm Ozzy, I certainly if I'm Eric, I want, it's my decision making now. So I think that's what we'll see. And it'll be interesting to see whether there's some changes in terms of how this draft goes and how the personnel goes. But, if you've got the same owner and the same head coach, I just don't think you're going to see a wild swing in how this thing goes down. And there's a lot of decisions to be made. I think you can have some insight into how it may go. Yeah, Flacco probably will be dealt. I think they could wait until March 11th and cut him and deal with that, but I think there's going to be some suitors for him, and so I think you probably can deal. I wouldn't expect a wild return for Joe Flacco. More than anything at this point, it's a salary dump. And is it the ending he deserves? No, absolutely not. But this is the way it's going, and I think everybody understands that. So I think he'll probably be dealt. Suggs is Mosley. A very tough call. I think in the end, they'd probably try to re-sign him or probably get that done. Suggs is tough because, he played pretty well this year, but they got some young guys coming up at his position. That is historically where you make a move to save money, so tough call there. So I think you can see sort of where it's leaning, and you're right, things could change, but, I've got a rough idea how some of this may go.
Yondu, you think he comes back?
Yonda, I think he does come back.
I would bet more on that than against that. Seeing how much he loves the game and how he had the game taken away from him last year, and certainly didn't have the kind of year where it felt like he wouldn't want to do it again. He seemed to be having himself a pretty good time this year, quite frankly. Hey, every time I saw him, he was kind of happy and smiling. Even when they were losing, he was out in front of it and happy to be back playing football again after having it taken away from him. So I think he might be one of those guys that got to rip it off his back. How about Weddle? That's a fascinating story because he's such a captain for this thing that I don't know what happens if Suggs and Weddle both aren't there next year, right? Like, that's sort of Ray and Ed both leaving, kind of different complexion of everything if those cats aren't there, right?
Well, Suggs, Weddle, and Mosley. Yeah, I mean, I think you could live without that. It's not quite Ray and Ed. I think you could live without it. Suggs, Weddle, and Mosley. I think that's where you're tough. I mean, who wore the green dot on the helmet this year? Weddle made a lot of calls. I think Mosley wouldn't mind making them. I think you've got to have some leadership in there of some kind. And you can see these young players coming up. I mean, Judon, he really took off the second half of the year. Zadarius, I think, will be gone. I think he's going to make some money in the free agent market. It all depends on how they decide to formulate this thing. My 2 cents would be try to bring back as many pieces of this defense as you can. You don't need to change much there. Weddle, it's a decent amount of money, and the fans were all over him at one point. He's a key part of this thing. He brings so much to it. This is Eric's call, and I don't mean Eric Weddle. I mean Eric DaCosta, because Weddle said so on Monday. He said that, if they want me back, I'm coming. If not, I'm retiring. So it's up to the Ravens here. And I think in the long run, he may come back. I don't know. Something tells me he may come back.
Well, one of the things that happened this year for a lot of these cats is they stay way healthier. You know what I mean?
Right.
Even being in the locker room Sunday after the game, guys weren't bag of ice. And that, I don't know what that speaks to, John. You and I have been at this a long time, and we know how brutal a game it is. I mean, just seeing the guy's ankle turn around out there, the Hearns last week is crazy. But this group of especially the elder statesmen. I mean, Flacco's going to walk into Jacksonville or Miami or Washington, wherever it's going to be, as healthy a 34-year-old guy as he can be at this point in his career. And if you get him protection, he could probably go play. I would say the same thing for Weddle and Yandon, a couple of these guys who haven't been so healthy in January in recent years, right?
Yeah. Here's what I can bring to the table as far as just sort of observation. Weddle was in OTAs at one point. He stepped up to the podium and said, "Listen, I had a long talk with myself about whether I wanted to go through this again." And the reason he did that was because he was hurt at the end of last year, and it took a long time for him to get his body back in shape. And so it was a fight, and he wondered whether he wanted to go through that. So here we are, fast forward to a year later, or however many months later, and Monday, Weddle talks to reporters and said, "Listen, I feel a whole lot better than I did last year. I want to play. I'm ready to go." So it sounds to me like he's in a different frame of mind coming off of this season. And
well, these guys liked each other. This was a close group. I mean, that's not sort of hyperbole or whatever.
No.
These guys got together in November, December, and dug out from 4 and 5 and started to believe. And it was fun being around them the last month. It really was. And I never thought they were winning the Super Bowl. And I think in retrospect, John, I got a lot of silver coming in now that I'm showing off on our Facebook Live now. You should know better than to think the youngest quarterback in the history of playoff football is going to seize the day over a veteran quarter. I mean, that's not the way this plays out over 40 years of watching football. Usually the veteran guy wins in January, and the guy's making his first playoff start usually is convicted in the end of being a culprit in butterfingers or bad decisions or being overwhelmed or whatever that is. So I get all of that, but this group had some fun, and I think that leads to guys wanting to be more of a part of it than feeling broken down and so disappointed at the end, right?
Yeah, I think it was genuine. I mean, just watching and listening. I mean, you got Smokey Brown saying, and he just disappeared from the offense. He did virtually nothing in the second half of the season once Lamar took over. He says, "I'd love to come back. This is the most fun I've had in my career." I was like, whoa, I thought that was kind of interesting. Robert Griffin, who's been in a lot of good and bad, tough situations, says, "Oh, I would love to come back, and I like what they're doing here." So I think a lot of people, there was something percolating on that sideline in that locker room. And Weddle, he did say, I think we've laid the foundation here. This is what it's gonna be, this sort of feeling. And that's a big positive as far as I'm concerned. That it seems like I mean, those receivers were not complaining, even though their production went way down, and that's taking money out of their pockets. So that really says something.
He is John Eisenberg. He is Be More Eisenberg out on Twitter, and the book that he has inked that everyone should be reading if they're going on a cruise this winter, The League, How 5 Rivals Created the NFL and Launched the Sports Empire. John, plug your book real quick so we can get back to some more Ravens, but, I always like helping anyone plug books, and I'm happy that people like you still write great books, and we get a chance to read them.
Yes, well, thank you. It is a book of early NFL history. It's really a creation story of pro football. How in the world did this league get itself together? Because when you go back and study it, the first 30, 40 years, it was not a very successful league. Hard to believe now. It was almost a failing enterprise. Was losing money. No one was coming out of this thing with any sort of profit. And what I did was focus on not the leatherhead players, but a couple of or 5 of the really foundational owners who took this thing by the lapels and carried it through those tough years and set it up to succeed. How in the world did they do that? George Halas and Tim Mara with the Giants, George Preston Marshall with the Redskins, Burt Bell with the Eagles, Art Rooney with the Steelers. How in the world did they work together while they were trying to beat each other on the field, but work together as businessmen in pro football to keep that league going? A lot of mistakes were made, a lot of successes, a lot of good decisions, and key things along the way. So, it's a book of history. I've done a ton of media with it. I'll actually be in Washington at Politics and Pros, which is pretty cool, on Sunday the 27th of January at 5 p.m. So,
and you will be on Radio Row in Atlanta with us at some point in the following week. So, that'll be cool too. So, hopefully they'll hear you in all sorts of places talking about the two things that, you've been chasing around, your book and the Ravens here in the last 6 months. And I think the Ravens are their own story on a national level for this year. But we've got other football happening here this week, and these teams march on and these games march on. But I think for the Ravens, part of this is tied to where the Browns and the Bengals and the Steelers are in this offseason, where the Steelers have really them falling apart led to us having a pretty good time here last week, because if the Steelers hold the form, they don't lose football games in December, and we're not playing football games in December, or if we are, it's as a wild card, right? Literally.
Oh, totally. I mean, the Steelers, this was totally tied to what happened in Pittsburgh, and there's definitely a soap opera going on up there, and lots of fingers of blame being pointed, and they've got some reckoning to do up there. And it will be a very interesting offseason there, needless to say. They've got another Rooney in charge, a younger Rooney, and it will be a challenge to his stewardship. Let's see how that thing plays out. Right now, the Bengals and Browns, they don't have coaches, right? No head coaches, half the AFC North. So it's very hard. I mean, with that in mind, certainly the Ravens ended the season the most stable and progressive and forward-thinking. There's a lot of decisions to be made here, but a lot of positives as well. And so I think they'll have a little bit of love in the off season as a team that could repeat. I mean, and again, it depends a lot on Pittsburgh, but I think there'll be some changes up there.
He is John Eisenberg, Be More Eisenberg, and of course at Ravens.com, as well as the book, The League, being out there as well. For Eric and Ozzie and this sort of handing off of the baton, some thoughts about, anything with Eric that will be different as you see it that hasn't already been implemented. This is as soft a handoff, I think, as we've seen in the history of the league. I think the New York Giants have done this with Ernie Accorsi and some other places where there's been a long-standing sort of, hierarchy or thought process. But in the history of the league, I don't know that there's been a 23-year guy who has selected every single player in the history of the franchise. The whole thing is kind of unprecedented, and I know Ozzie got his 5 minutes, in the aftermath of the loss, but at some point, Ozzie's going to be written about in all of this and Hall of Fame and all of that, and what happens with these players, including Lamar, as part of his legacy. But I think people are going to be paying attention to what Eric says and how he says it differently and what he's going to do differently, because Eric's been very much in the shadow of all of this for a very, very long time. All of us know Eric, right?
Definitely know Eric, and sure, there'll be changes. It's hard to say what exactly. I mean, they've had a very growing and expanding analytics department there for a number of years. People crunching some numbers and trying to project careers. A lot of it has had to do with the draft. I don't know how much Ozzie has paid heed to that. I'm sure he has paid heed to it some. But I mean, they wouldn't have it otherwise. But I do believe that's, and I'm stereotyping here a little bit, but I do believe younger guy, probably as Eric is, that he's probably more inclined to pay heed to those things. So we'll see whether that plays out, and how it manifests itself. I have no idea. Ozzie, of course, reflexively over the years has drafted the guts of a football team: linemen, defensive linemen, linebackers, offensive linemen. If you can say one thing negatively, some skill, there hasn't been the addition of the skill position stars, halfbacks or running backs, wide receivers, guys. It just hasn't happened as much there. So maybe Eric will change. That could be a key area of change. Maybe he'll see that you need that more in today's football. I would caution against saying, you always got to build up the foundation, the guts of your football team. So we'll see, but there's plenty of ways where it could change.
Lots of decisions and lots of different moving parts here for the Ravens in the aftermath of the loss to the Chargers. Any thoughts on who's going to be in Atlanta 2 weeks from now, John? I tell you what, it's hard to not like the way Andrew Luck's playing right now, and I think all of those teams that win last week bring momentum, bring quarterbacks. Nick Foles has some energy as well. Pretty good football games this weekend. I mean, entertaining football this weekend. Very
entertaining. I don't know. I think the Chargers are going to have a hard time up in New England. I think New England is probably happy that the Chargers are coming. I think the Ravens, they had a good thing going. The Chargers did a nice job against it, beat them. I think the Ravens, with the speed that Jackson brings, were the possibility of really causing some problems for that New England team. So I think New England probably wins that game. And I won't go through them all, but I think in this round, generally, you're going to see home teams more and more. They worked hard for these home field advantages, and that's not to say there won't be an upset. The Eagles, the Colts certainly over the Chiefs, I think could happen. Andrew Luck, this is sacrilege to say somebody in Baltimore, but watching him take apart Houston, he looked a little bit like John Unitas there. Pull it in that Colt uniform, dropping back and just tearing apart Houston. So he is in a very dangerous spot, and so that one wouldn't surprise me at all. In the NFC, I think we'll probably see the Rams and the Saints in the end playing there. The Eagles are a little bit dangerous. The Cowboys are overachieving. I bet it's the Rams and Saints in the end.
We're going to talk quarterbacks. If all the chalks win, right, it's Mahomes and Brady, and it would be Goff and Breeze, right, in the championship games, youth and old. And if Andrew Luck sneaks in, or if Phillip Rivers, sneaks in as well, and he's in search of and all that, Dak Prescott's in search of, they're all there. It's still, you look at these quarterbacks and say, who do I think is going to make it happen this week? Who's going to show up and play the big game and the big moment? Yeah. That's why we're going to be watching all day Saturday and Sunday. John Eisenberg's here. The book is The League: How Five Rivals Created the NFL and Launched the Sports Empire. Please go pick it up in the offseason. And, of course, you can pick up John out on Twitter and at ravens.com, where he will be monitoring all things offseason, just like Luke and I. Always great to visit with you, John. I'll talk Orioles next time. I'll let you off the hook on that one.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
And about the Orioles, they said nothing. They said nothing at all. There you go, John. Be well.
Thank you. You too.
John Eisenberg. Be more Eisenberg. Add on Twitter the way to find him. All of our WNST coverage can be heard in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. The morning newspaper ships digitally into the new year to your email inbox at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in in the best shape of your life. Also brought to you by the Maryland Jockey Club and our friends at Laurel Park. Morning Newspaper has our entries in it every day, as well as the front of WNST.net. If there's anything weird, big deals, Ravens trade Joe Flacco to the Dolphins for a second and a sixth, you'll get that first on the WNST Tech Service. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And Dennis will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home, getting you ready for the weekend of football. Indy and Kansas City, Dallas at the Rams, Chargers at New England. That's 2 LA teams. And the Eagles taking on the New Orleans Saints as well on the weekend. I am Nestor. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Snapchat and Instagram and streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.